Eastern Europe right now faces a huge threat from Russia. It's a threat that the West has mostly been asleep at the wheel. I would say Western Europe. And that's because they've been relying on the United States' security umbrella for the last 80 years. That seems to be going away. Basically, the West, primarily the Trump administration, is not really looking for peace through strength or a just peace or an enduring peace. They're looking for peace at any cost. They're looking for Ukraine to surrender.
All right, Mr. Mežinskis.
It's a long way from your first GarageBand episodes of WBD, no?
I didn't even have video then. I used to, where was the first one? LA. We've done a few though.
We've done a few.
Yeah, this
Enjoyed
is your
them.
First time on the new show, man.
That's right.
Introducing you to the new audience.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for coming to Bedford.
It was a pleasure. Just got to see a good one on Saturday.
7-1. It was a hell of a win. I've got something funny to tell you about that little trip. So, you know, after the game, I tried to drive you around to see the crackheads and we couldn't find any.
Yeah.
I got a phone call from my buddy. He'd been into town during the day and he said, there's police everywhere and they're moving people on. And so obviously they're starting to react and do things in the town, which I thought was quite interesting because it's weird. I wanted to show you what we were dealing with and it wasn't there. So it proves it can be dealt with. But it's a good time to get you on the show because when you open a small business, you become really exposed to how screwed the economy is and how difficult government is making it for business. Like, it's hard out there. And I know how to create businesses. I know how to create businesses that work. But it's really, really tough out there. And it's tough for everybody I know who's running a business in a town centre, that everyone's finding it hard when they didn't used to find it hard. And I'm not just going to blame this Labour government. But the trajectory right now is not good. On a macro scale, it's not good at a local level. It's not good for people's future. Like, the whole thing seems a mess. And I know you're dialed into all of this.
Well,
is it going to get better?
I mean, I'm definitely a macro guy more than a small business sort of grinding day in and day out, as you have been doing quite successfully over the years, and proud of all your success. It's nice to see it, indeed, and I enjoy coming to Bedford and watching the matches and seeing your success. And I think next year, it'll be the first time if you guys win 4 promotions. If you win, it would be the first time ever.
So that was meant to be a tough game Saturday. We were nervous and we won 7-1. So 2 more wins in the last 5 games secures the league title, apart from goal difference. But I can't see a 47 goal difference being turned around in 3 games. So that would be the 3rd title in a row for the men's side. And that's been done before. Teams have done that before. Nobody's ever done 4. So we're going to go for a 4th. And that set a record. First time in the history of UK football that will have happened. So yes, we're going for that. But by the way, you might not know this local business stuff, but it's all downstream.
No, I got some comments on it.
Yeah, but it's all downstream from it. You know, just simple little things like, I can even flip it to my bar. The first year I had the bar, turnover was up. What was up? From the previous owners did 500,000, we did 600,000. Profit was about the same because we had to invest in the place a little bit, but you know, we made a decent level of profit. We had a 40% drop the year after.
Yeah.
And that drop is entirely because when interest rates went up, rents went up, mortgages went up, disposable income went down, people are out less. So that's a direct, immediate impact from a global macro situation affecting the UK macro situation, affecting central bank and government policies, which mean people have less money. Throw the inflation in, people have less money.
Yeah.
Where we are now is, on top of that, they said they don't want to tax working people anymore. So what they've done is they've put in new business taxes or new inheritance taxes. But every business tax is a tax on people. We know that. So it is hard out there. But I'm not as dialed into the macro stuff as I was probably last time we spoke. I'm just dialed into the local bits.
Yeah. Well, I can make some comments on that. And for the new listeners or the listeners that haven't heard of me that are not necessarily as dialed into the Bitcoin space, since 2018, I've been doing 2 surveys, statistical analyses type things. The first one is tracking the growth of the global money supply. And the money supply, it's very specific money supply. It's the central bank money supply. So that's the actual cash the central banks print. People talk about the printing press all the time. Nobody knows what it means. It's a monetary base. We'll talk about that. All right. So I've been tracking that since 2018. Just broad strokes. It was around $20 trillion equivalent. That's all the central banks in the world. Not all of them, but top 50, and it's 95% of global GDP. There was $20 trillion in 2018 or so when I started tracking it, a little bit less even. In December 2021, it peaked at over $30 trillion.
50% up.
Yeah, in 3 years. And of course, the large component of that, the biggest component was the COVID stimulus, the money printing, all the rest. But that just shows you the scale of it. Went from $20 to $30 trillion equivalent. And now they've pulled it all the way back down to 25.5. So it's extremely volatile. It will affect prices, businesses, and exactly what you said. The mortgage rates go up. You have the bankruptcies of the SVB banks and people that made bad treasury bets thinking that treasuries are going to be a good investment at, 2%. And then all of a sudden they're 5%. And that means you lose money if you were long them. But anyway, there's a lot in there and we can unpack that. But that's one of the things I've been tracking. And then the other thing, which I've also been tracking since 2018, is this idea of the Bitcoin network, which is a power regression, which is not exponential growth, not linear growth, but it's power growth. We're not going to get into it yet, but I'm just setting the table a little bit for the people that haven't heard of me. So if you look at Bitcoin, you look at monetary policy, and also I live in the Baltics. I'm American and Latvian. Obviously, we have the Ukraine war on our border, and wars come in very turbulent economic times. So if you have the Bitcoin world, monetary policy world, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which includes Ukraine, perhaps I'm the best one to talk to.
Yeah.
The trifecta of those three things. But no, we can look at this chart if you want. I have a chart about the UK specifically.
Yeah.
Since the crisis, showing the growth of government spending, showing the growth of the money supply and the growth of GDP. And you can look at it because there are narratives with all of this. And the thing that I think it's important to remember, no matter which government is there, things are on a trajectory, and it's just important to be prepared in that trajectory. Now, obviously, the sort of one-size-fits-all solution that you used to talk about on your old show a lot, and I still talk about on my show, is, of course, Bitcoin. But there are a lot of other factors there. And Bitcoin, I've said since the beginning of my podcast, which was 2017, that with my old co-host, Fernando, we looked forward to the day where Bitcoin was just sort of like any other asset, like oil, like gold. And we're getting there.
We're close.
Yeah, we're close, but we're not there yet. And the trajectory is something that actually you can find comfort in. It's somewhat predictable, as opposed to government spending, taxation, money printing. That is not predictable. There are trends there too, but the Bitcoin trend is better. So it's not a direct, it's more of a macro view. It's not a direct response to your question about the UK economy, but we can look at some numbers if you want.
Yes, there's a couple of setups I want to just put in place.
Sure.
So we flipped the show 62 episodes ago. Some people watching, listening, don't even realize that previous to this, we made 860 shows about Bitcoin and macro and money before we went more general. So you look at the YouTube comment sometimes and people are like, stop shitting Bitcoin. Why are you always going on about Bitcoin? They don't realize the background. And so there are people who listen to this show who aren't exposed to Bitcoin in a way where they understand it maybe like we do. They just think it's this crypto thing, a crypto bro thing.
Yep.
They haven't fully understood the connection between Bitcoin and money and why it is an important asset. So we will have to do a bit of setup there. That's an important point. Some of the macro stuff you'll talk about, I might dial you back in and just get some detail. Again, because they maybe have been coming to listen to other shows and don't realize or don't understand the details, maybe like the old audience. But the other setup thing I want to talk about, there's a guy, have you seen this guy, Gary Economics, who's getting quite popular?
I've seen some clips.
Yeah. I actually think he should be Gary Politics, because I think his show is making political points, not economic points. I have some sympathy to his view that the financial system over the last, forever, but a little bit more aggressively and more recently, it's been the wealth gap has widened. The system as it is definitely benefits the richer in society. If you hold the assets, you get richer. I have some sympathy for that. I have the sympathy for him where he talks about the impact on this widening wealth gap on the poorest in society and the eroding of middle class. I think he sees the problem right. I disagree with his solutions. I for whatever reason, maybe we'll cover that. But I think it's important because as he's talking about these things, they're appealing to people. It's kind of like left-wing populism, really. And I think he's getting a lot of people share his content out and saying, this guy speaks sense. But I think his ideas of solving it are wrong. And I think we can help people understand why he's wrong in some of his. But I think he's right on there is a problem. And this financial system has really benefited the rich.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's a monopolized financial system, which is why Bitcoin's appealing.
Yeah.
But then when people like that go on and you can tell are sort of spouting some tropes without actually understanding Bitcoin, which I saw some clip where he was talking about how if you were Satoshi Nakamoto and you just created this thing, which he doesn't understand the underlying protocol or how it relates to, basic money across the world, being uncensorable. He said, well, you would just get a lot of fools in, greater fools theory, buy. And then, you just start dumping on them. And then the co-host or whoever was interviewing him said, but most of the coins haven't been sold. And he's like, yeah, I know he hasn't sold out of his account. Again, using the word account shows that he doesn't understand how even Bitcoins are held in public-private key cryptography. But he says, yeah, I know he hasn't sold in his account, but you could short it. And if you think that was Satoshi Nakamoto's plan to create a global, neutral, uncensorable money to where it would reach $2 trillion in value, so then he could short it on which exchange?
Yeah.
Then the theory is sort of blown wide open right there. But that's just one point.
Yeah.
We can address anything you want. I'm happy to.
Well, it's the wealth tax as well. Like, I have the sympathy for why people think a wealth tax should exist.
Yeah.
I have the sympathy why he's come to that solution. I don't think it's workable. I think almost everybody who's come back to him has said, look, every attempt at a wealth tax has failed, and every government that's tried it across Europe has stopped them. And also, it doesn't solve the underlying problem, is that, yes, it's a cash grab right now for governments to pay for things, but ultimately what happens when that runs out? That we have a structural problem with governments.
And the structural problem all comes down to the traditional definition of monopoly. I talk about this all the time. Monopoly doesn't mean a big company or someone that has a huge amount of market share that needs to be broken up. The actually original Adam Smith definition, and Mises has repeated this and made it more clear, is there's no such thing as a natural monopoly, because you're just, what are you saying? That someone is so good and produces at such a competitive rate at such great prices that they just beat out everybody and then later decide to raise prices? No, that's not actually how it works in the market. Market is cutthroat, better for consumers always. A monopoly is simply a firm that has special privilege from the government to operate. That's the definition of a monopoly, is a special license. And they are, ubiquitous in the financial world. Banking licenses, of course, are monopolistic privileges. And you can go on down the list. But that's where if you want to actually cut out the waste, fraud, and abuse, you need to lower the barriers to entry and remove monopolistic privileges. That's the simple way to put it.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Well, this is the thing, is this is what politics is about, right? It's about satisfying people's perhaps legitimate wants and needs and demands, but also, events cause events, right? So there can be some rampant fraud in some sector of the economy, and people demand more protection, oversight, but then other people come in and abuse that protection, oversight. So it's just, it's the old law A causes problem B causes laws B, which causes law C. So problem C and law C, you get the idea of the order there. So that's politics, and it's going to last. And it's lasted a long time. I have lots of theories about that right now regarding specifically this Ukraine conflict, because what we're seeing right now, again, you stop me, I don't want to go crazy on all the ideas, but in the West, we are, I'm not even going to say decline, and I have charts for this to show you that we are larger, structurally more powerful than places like Russia. Not as much China, but surely Iran and North Korea, and the way that those structures, societies work. We are well more powerful and equipped to deal with threats from abroad. But there is this sort of always this appeal from those that are in need or feel hurt that the strong man or the good leader can come and help them. And that, of course, affects democratic societies as well. And we're seeing that a lot. And that's very scary. Again, I'm American Latvian. Before World War II in the 1930s, you could look this up on ChatGPT. It was a common thing. I asked my father about this. How could Europe become so hysterical? Like, I've been literally my whole life, I was, 10 when a little bit younger than 10. I won't say exactly my age, but I'm around 40, let's say. So when the Berlin Wall came down, I was quite young, and just my whole life, I've been asking my father about how these things worked and how it could be that Eastern Europe, which we got caught behind the Iron Curtain, how could it be so hysterical? How did you have, the crazy communists and the evil Nazis taking over all of Europe? And usually it comes down to hysteria and also authoritarian governments. And about half of the governments in the 30s in Europe were authoritarian, including the Baltics, including Poland. Obviously, we know the big three, Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini, but half of them were authoritarian. There was only, France, Britain. There was not that many that were actually free and democratic. And unfortunately, I think we're sliding that way today. I think we have plenty of checks and balances in place to stop it. But I'm much more worried about that threat than a sort of slow, stagnating decline from higher taxing governments. I know that doesn't, now that I just say those words, it exactly doesn't jive with the beginning of your show and the early questions. No, I would like that we wouldn't have to choose. I agree.
Yeah.
But it's going to take stronger leaders with better policies. And I think it's very hard to talk about, low taxes, restrained government, when, you have the other actions, for example, like what's happening in the United States right now. Although I, as a, sort of center-right, low government intervention person, might very much agree with the way that certain aspects of the Trump administration are handling government waste, fraud, and abuse, as they say. There should be a process. I mean, you need judges. You should have it bipartisan. That's not what's happening right now. And it's, of course, infuriating other parts of society. And it's just one example. But yeah, it seems like authoritarianism is more appealing than sort of rational, prudent discussions in society to curb the waste, fraud, and abuse.
I think we've had a long period of rational government. We've had a nice couple of decades of Western liberal democracies. We've had good times. We've had economic growth. We've had the freedom to travel. Like in my 20s and 30s was very different from what my dad experienced in his 20s and 30s. Life's been pretty good. I mean, the 90s were great. The noughties were great. I think we're in a period now where they're tough. We've got a tough economic climate, and that's affecting people. And I think what would be good today is that I know there's a lot of people listening right now who are working, lower middle class, who somehow have gone from a position where they've got two maybe 2 decent salaries in their family, got a nice house, and suddenly they can't afford the things they used to be able to afford. They're not seeing wage growth. They might have had a business, it's closed down. They are doing their grocery shopping, it's higher. They can't maybe have a holiday this year. They've maybe had to pull their kids out of a school they had them in. There's a range of people across that spectrum from lower middle class who've seen a drastic change in their financial position. I know a lot of people don't have pensions. A lot of people my age don't have pensions, and they have no plan for when they retire. Perhaps they might sell their house, but they're in a weird position. They don't understand how they've got there, why we've got here. So you're tracking the money supply. I think a lot of people listening don't even know about the money supply, how it works, how it affects them. And so what they're seeing is they're taking their information from the political party they support and the arguments they make, or someone like a Gary Economics, or something they read in the paper. I think a lot of people haven't been exposed to the kind of things that you've been exposed to. And so I think if you can help people understand how the financial system truly works and what's really going on, that's at least going to give them a basis for understanding how it affects their life and the decisions they can make for them, and possibly convince some people why you and I have a preference for keeping percentage of our income in Bitcoin.
Sure. Well, as Milton Friedman said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So inflation, it could mean two things, as it is referred to a rise in the increase in prices, a rise in prices that is always correlated to an increase in the money supply in excess of the demand of that money. And the demand is usually the hard thing to think about and to figure out, but you can track the supply. So that's what I've been doing. And so if you can find the growth of the supply, you should at least be as good as the supply as far as your income growth, your asset growth. I can show you a good chart on that as well if you want to see it. But,
yeah, let's go. Where should we start?
Well, that actually on that topic, let's go to B8. Because this one is slightly dated because there's different metrics there, and I haven't, some of them are only updated annually, but this is in the United States. I do have a UK one for you, but if you just look at this goes back to 1969, and I got median family income, median home price, the S&P 500, the monetary base, which is the United States money supply, and CPI as calculated by the Fed. Now,
it all seems pretty correlated up until about 90, 91. Everything's, or is it because it's so extreme towards the end? There are some extremities.
Yeah, I mean, things usually can look crazy like this. Everything grows exponentially. So if I put this on log scale, that would all kind of just work to straight lines. But the growth rates are different. And yes, obviously from the global financial crisis, you see things go very crazy. But just look at what they tell us is the general rise in prices. All right, that's the tomato line. It looks almost flat. It's the red line. And if you look at the multiples since 1969, it's 8.
Okay.
And then look at something like the S&P 500. And this is as of December 2023. That S&P 500 is up 52 times. It was even more, but all the Trump craziness has actually pulled it back down. It's been up to, 78, 80 times. Now it's back down 50 times higher. And the printing press, the monetary base, is up 90 times. So if they tell us that your income only needs to rise by a factor of 8 over something like 50, 55 years, but you can see that asset prices, asset values have risen by 50, or the money supply has risen by 90, that is a serious concern for any family. How are you going to protect your wealth?
This is the difference between affording to live and wealth.
Exactly.
So
this is asset. This shows very specifically asset versus consumer prices. And then the ones that we also think about, like median family income or median home price. Those are basically the same as the CPI, up 10x, up 17x for median home price. And that should actually be lower because homes in the US back in the 60s and 70s were smaller. So if you had to adjust, you'd actually need to take it lower to flatten it out.
Well, I know my dad's first house was like £2,000 or £3,000. I remember him telling me that, and he bought it in the 70s.
Right.
My first house was £100,000. I bought it 20 years ago. My dad lent me £10,000, £5,000 deposit, £5,000 to furnish it, which I paid off over a couple of years. My son wants to get on the housing ladder now. He's not going to get anything for $100,000. He's not going to get. I got a 3-bedroom house. For my son now to get that same house, probably $250,000.
Yep.
And he probably needs to borrow $30,000 off me for a deposit and then money to furnish it. I could have bought my house without my dad's help. My son definitely cannot buy a house without my help. It's impossible. And my daughter, when she gets to that stage, she definitely won't be able to. But I think this is the really interesting part is that, and I think this is where Gary's right, it's become a lot harder for people to get on the housing ladder. And if we've seen the assets up, like S&P 51%, we know there's a certain part of society that's going to get richer. They're going to be able to protect their wealth and get richer and protect their future a lot easier from those who aren't involved in acquiring the assets.
Yeah, this shows very clearly that if you have more assets, you can earn more assets. And also you have to have assets. If you don't have assets, you won't keep up with the money supply.
Yes.
And if you're not keeping up with the money supply, that's the real measure of inflation.
Yes.
There is price inflation, but there's also monetary inflation, or the growth of the money. So they tell us that you only needed 8 times, and that translates to about 4% per year, all right? But the monetary inflation is 90 times higher than it was in 1969, and that translates to a much higher number, about 9% per year compound.
Can we do a shorter period? Let's go from the global financial crisis, 2008. What would you have had to have done to keep up?
It's very similar. This is I don't have the old slider my old charts, so these are all static on this one today. But the overall trend is something like, they tell you, in the U.S. at least, they tell you inflation is about 4% per year. You got to keep up with that over the long, long term. But the money growth is 9% a year. Since the global financial crisis, the S&P has been up maybe 12% per year.
Right.
So those, over the long term, the S&P would only be about 7%. And if you reinvested those dividends, it'd be 9%. But yeah, that is the way that people need to think about their wealth, is how much am I growing it per year? Because this is exponential growth and it compounds and it's a fixed, constant growth. And if you don't keep up with the system, then you will fall behind, and you can fall behind very, very quickly.
Is this essentially the Cantillon effect at play?
I mean, it's one of the ideas of the Cantillon effect. So, he who is closest to the money and the money printer will have most access. But I think, that was originally actually about gold mining. We're talking about gold mining and how that affected prices. I think that's it's an interesting topic, but I don't think it's that amazing. I think the better explanation is simply as I said before, the monopoly. He who has the monopoly is going to earn the most. Okay, so anytime there's a new government program or a new, designated area of government concern, and they're going to pass bills, they're going to allocate funding for this, the government themselves don't do anything. All they do is say, this must happen, here is the money. And by the way, we print the money. We do tax the money as well, but we never make it. We always run deficits, so we're going to make up some of that by printing. The private sector has to enact that policy, but there are favored actors in the private sector, and those are the monopolistic actors. So that's, at the end of the day, that's what happens. And, I'm as, perhaps you're a bit more connected now in Bedford, but, on the grand scheme and, national, international politics, we don't have it. Obviously, none of us have a say. And that's what you have to be thinking about.
Who has a say in government?
Yeah, who has a say, what they're doing. Look at where the money's going. Look at which companies are doing well. And it's not, I'm also not one of these people that sort of just drones on about a sort of broad philosophical concept that could be libertarian in nature. We had a lot of that in the Bitcoin space, as you know. Look, I'm in Eastern Europe, and things are extremely dangerous right now. Specifically right now, Ukraine is basically a shield for us in Eastern Europe. And if they are forced into this, through this peace krieg or blitz peace, as it's been called, might not have not heard that term, but it's been thrown around over here. Basically, the West, primarily the Trump administration, is not really looking for peace, peace through strength, or a just peace, or an enduring peace. They're looking for peace at any cost. They're looking for Ukraine to surrender things. A very interesting phenomenon. Since Trump has taken power, you could look at all the defense stocks in the United States. They are down. You could look at all the defense stocks in Europe. They are up. Complete polar opposites, and big. I mean, European stocks are flying right now. European defense contractors are flying right now, specifically because Europe knows that they need to shoulder more of the burden because they can't rely on the United States anymore. Which, again, by the way, we've always thought that that's a good thing. We in Eastern Europe, we do pay our little 2% of the GDP is the target, but Western Europe does not. So you're finding now these monopolistic actors that are going to get these contracted deals with the government. They're going to do well. And that's just like a fact of life. I'm not even saying it as far as a sort of Puritan ideological, we need to just break all the monopolies. A lot of that's just unrealistic. Eastern Europe right now faces a huge threat from Russia. And it's a threat that the West has mostly been asleep at the wheel. I would say Western Europe. And that's because they've been relying on the United States as security umbrella for the last 80 years. That seems to be going away.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
So the suspicions regarding the military-industrial complex in the US, is that part of this, in that the US government has been running a ongoing growing deficit? A large part of their expense is the military. I believe it's $1 trillion a year, and I don't know what the US tax receipts are. Within there's been an incentive over the last couple of decades to be involved in wars, because when you're involved in wars, there's large military contracts to provide certain things to the US government.
Yep.
Is it as real and evil as that? There are incentives within government to have wars to ensure these contracts happen.
I'm not as conspiratorial as some people here. A few different ways to approach this. Firstly, on the military-industrial complex in the United States, there's not as big of a one as people think. First of all, yes, the military spends a lot, but they spend a lot because they want to be the dominant power in the world, and they've been that way since World War II for 80 years. So that's just a fact. The United States specifically, even forget about other actors, that's just a fact of how the United States is. Second, if you look at the market caps of like Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed and these large companies in the US, it's not that much, maybe 100 billion-ish a year. Maybe. Yeah, it's something like 100 billion. I can check. Apple itself is a $2.5 trillion company, or whatever it is, 3 trillion. I mean, all the FANG stocks, trillions of dollars of market cap. So, yes, they're monopolized. Yes, they have special privilege. Yes, they have contracts that they can get that normally other people can't get. All of those things, I take the point. Again, I'm not dogmatic about any of this, but I'm just saying. So that's the point about the military-industrial complex. Regarding the world order, which I think is very serious right now, that's being redone, as we speak. And it's literally going back to old 19th century power politics, imperial politics. I can tell you, again, I know we have a lot of directions to go in the show today, so I don't want to keep bringing it back to the Baltics. But the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, we have been in the European Union. We've been in NATO for over 20 years now. Still, we are looked at by certain people in the United States who just want peace at any cost. We're looked at as somehow we need to be part of Russia's sphere of influence because we were illegally occupied during the Soviet Union by them for 50 years. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, not 99%, but 100% certainty, that we have been on the table in these discussions between Trump and Putin. They have indeed talked about what's going to happen. If you can read between the lines, there was this disastrous meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House last month. We could talk about that later, but regardless, there was a question from a very interesting Polish journalist. He said, since the invasions of Russia in 2014 into Ukraine and into Crimea, when they just took Crimea, which again, a violation of the Geneva Convention. And if anyone wants to what about me about the Bush wars, I would agree with you. Bush did not have an international coalition of the willing like his father did to go into Kuwait. So if you were against the Bush wars, that is the Bush Jr. wars specifically, I don't know why you would not be against the Putin wars, but there seems to be this weird coalition of sort of reactionary libertarians and reactionary right-wing, alt-right people in the U.S. who are very much against Eastern Europe and Ukraine and very much for Russia, sort of this new world order with Russia. It's a whole nother topic.
You've gone here now.
I've gone there.
I've gone there.
I'm sorry.
There.
It's hard. It's
well,
hard.
No,
it's hard. No. I just want to say one thing. So in that meeting, the Polish journalist said to Trump, he said, you put these troops into Eastern Europe. The U.S., all of NATO, bolstered the defenses, all the troops that were in the Baltics, Poland, Romania, post 2014. Okay, because they finally, even though we've been saying it since 1991, everybody knew there was a security vacuum in Eastern Europe, the Great Plains of Europe. There was a risk. And he said, with all these discussions about the Ukraine war and everything, are you going to still commit to Poland? Are you going to leave the troops in Poland? And Trump said, I'm very committed to Poland. And he went on, you guys spend as much as you do in GDP per capita, so on and so forth. And then the journalist said, and the Baltics? And Trump paused and he said, they're in a tough neighborhood. And then he sort of hemmed and hawed. And he's doing this because he's thinking about a good reaction to appease Putin. And then he says, they're in a tough neighborhood, but, yeah, I'm committed. But we spend just as much as Poland, slightly less now in GDP per capita, military spend per GDP. We know that the threat is real. We spend. So we should be appealing to a Trump alliance. And basically, if someone had been reading the tea leaves and watching there, he definitely has been cool on our defense. And so this is highly concerning for us. And again, all the while, you have the largest war in Europe since World War II. You have Russians coming in with Chinese kit, North Korean soldiers, and Iranian drones. And one of Putin's conditions of peace is that Ukraine should have an cut down, emaciated army of, 10, 20,000 troops with no foreign support. And this comes from the Russian leader who has Chinese kit, North Korean soldiers on European soil, and Iranian drones. 100 to 200 Iranian Shahed drones hit Ukraine every night. And this leader is negotiating over the heads of the Ukrainians with the U.S. administrations on taking back Western support for Ukraine. I mean, the whole thing is mind-boggling to us. But anyway, that's
we've gone there now.
We've gone there.
Well, let's do it, because I tell you, I've covered the other side on this show. I've seen the range of opinions. I have people listening in America, people listening in the UK, people listening in Europe. There is a distinct difference between the opinions of conservative Americans, the range of whether it's libertarian or MAGA or traditional Republicans. There is definitely a distinct difference between how they view everything that's happening in Ukraine and Russia and how people in Europe see things. you as somebody who is Latvian American understands.
I'm a Latvian citizen. I can say that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a dual national,
Yeah.
so you can question my loyalty to America. I have both, and I'm a proud European and a proud American.
I've been to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine. I've been to them all. I am a European who spent a lot of time in America. I see both, and there's this clash of ideas, but some of it about understanding the context of what's happened, opinions on why things started, and what the solution should be. I've covered the side that's coming from the more traditional Republican Americans and the MAGA, and so let's do it, because I think I know how the comments will go. I know, oh, you just want to extend the war. Oh, you're against peace. Oh, and the comments will be, well, will you send your kids there?
Your subscribers fall.
Yeah, they will. But it's good to cover both sides. I had this great interview with a guy called Faraz Modad, really interesting guy. He's a Christian Lebanese guy. We covered a lot about what's happening in the Middle East, but we also covered power games. And I've tried to understand in terms of power games, the kind of this new kind of rebirth of imperialism that's happening.
Yeah.
I've tried to be empathetic to the idea of, well, peace at a cost. Is it better than an endless ongoing war? So it's good to hear from the other side. Let's a good starting point, I think, may be those who believe that this kind of understanding that there is no scenario where Putin just goes, yeah, I was wrong, I'll pull out. Actually, let's go back a further step. I don't mind Dave Smith, but I know you have some issues with Dave Smith. There's a certain group of people who've discussed this who will point to the fact that Russia was provoked. The idea of Ukraine becoming a NATO member was a step too far. It's too much risk for Russia to have NATO country bordering them, potentially NATO troops within Ukraine. That was a provocation. That is a big argument that has circled for 3 years during this war, that Russia was provoked. And I have some sympathy to that idea. I don't think it required a war, but I'm just a simple person. How do you respond to that?
Sure. And I think that we should, again, we got Ukraine, we got the economy, we got macro. I got like 30 charts I can show you. So we should limit ourselves there. But the first overarching point, I have to repeat it again. I do not understand it. The idea that if you are, and if you were against, intervention, imperialism, the UN Charter, which said that borders should be respected, or even the threat of invading another country is illegal per the UN Charter. And yes, I know Bush violated that and only had the UK, by the way, by its side in those UN votes. Eventually got some more NATO troops to come, plenty of NATO troops actually, because they wanted to stand by their ally. But as far as the original agitation, it was really only the UK that stood by Bush's side. If you were against that, rightly, why are you for or trying to understand or think about the idea that Ukraine is not sovereign or somehow deserves to be in Russia's sphere of influence? And usually the answer that I get is, well, nukes. So, well, okay, so I guess you don't believe in private property or sovereignty. And because that is the world order that we have today. I'm not saying it's perfect, but that was the Geneva Conventions, the UN Charter, 1945 on. It was respecting sovereignty. And by the way, Eastern Europe got thrown under the bus there because we did get thrown into this sphere of influence when, at Potsdam and Yalta, Stalin was promising, first Churchill and Roosevelt and then Churchill and Truman, that democracy would be respected in these Eastern European states. And of course, it didn't happen. And the Baltics are the very interesting sort of skeleton key to all of this, because we were illegally occupied and invaded by the Soviet Union. So the first thing is I genuinely don't understand their concern trolling that we should be in the sphere of influence. Should the Baltics, should Ukraine be in the sphere of influence? The second thing is, if you don't believe that Ukraine has a voice or has a right to determination, you just have to ask yourself, why have they fought so ferociously and heroically for the last 3 years? Because clearly they have been. And then the next thing to say, okay, so about the NATO expansion, there is a reason why all of the Eastern European countries that came into NATO post-Soviet Union breakup didn't walk or crawl into NATO. They ran into NATO. It was already by 1999 that Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic got in. The Baltics were trying to get in by that time, but it was deemed too, sensitive. By 2004, they did, and it wouldn't have mattered if it was a Bush administration or a Democrat administration. They would have gotten in. And all of Eastern Europe, basically. And it is precisely because of the security vacuum that was formed after the Soviet Union that they wanted to get in. And they have every right to do that. The idea that they provoked Russia, there has been very limited missile installations that have been installed in Eastern Europe, specifically pre-2014. Post-2014, some more came in, rightly so. But pre-2014, before Russia invaded, there were troop drawdowns generally across Europe, a very solid drawdown from 1990 to 2014. Drawdown of American troops in Europe. Very limited missiles, and the missiles that were there were defense only. And the U.S. offered Russia to inspect those missiles. Contrast that to missiles that Russia would have in, say, Kaliningrad, where the inspections were not allowed. And as typical with the Russian way, they're very less transparent and very not as open about their dealings. Lech Walesa, the old Polish president who was the president of the Solidarity movement in Poland, first president after independence from Iron Curtain, Eastern Europe in the 90s. He said the Russian always has one hand on the pen and one on a hand grenade. And it more or less works this way. They just cannot be trusted with agreements. And this is what we see again today. So it's totally rational, logical, and normal that Eastern European countries should seek defense. And I am all for Western European countries to shoulder more of the burden of defense. That's a different story, though, than this is NATO, U.S. imperialism, encroachment on the Russian border, this and that. No one has ever talked about invading Moscow. No one's ever talked about invading St. Petersburg. And the idea that if you think that the nuclear threat of Russia is a problem, I have been saying this from the beginning, and many people have been saying this from the beginning of the war. Do you think that Putin would use nuclear weapons to have their army kicked out of Ukraine? I think the answer has been, every red line that Putin had has been crossed. He's made up these red lines. He's done the threats every few weeks. He's brought out the nuclear saber rattling. Every red line has been crossed. And I would say, again, there are varied opinions here, but even if some tactical nuke had to fly, it would be terrible. It would be awful. I don't think it would happen. Maybe it could happen. But even if it did, nations have the right to stand up for themselves. They have the right to be sovereign. The Estonian Defense Ministry made a very important statement in the fall. They said, last fall, they said if Russia was ever to line up on our border the way that they did for Ukraine in 2021 and 2022, 200,000 troops on their border, making all these demands, saying that they're not going to invade. By the way, Putin said they weren't going to invade about 5,000 times before that happened, and then they invaded. The Estonian Defense Ministry said, we're not just going to let you make the threats and eventually maybe come in. We're going to have to go on the offensive. And this is correct. From a national security point of view, if you're going to threaten, again, this is against the Geneva Convention, if you have the ability to strike back, and of course this is a big if in the game of power politics and big nations and small nations, but if you have the ability to strike back, and now the Baltics do with some of these ATACMS and Patriots that they're getting now precisely because of the Ukraine war. It didn't happen before the Ukraine war, but precisely now we are ordering more of these. That's the correct posture from a nation state level, is to fight back. We cannot just say, okay, you know what? Let's just, for the sake of humanity, for the sake of some libertarian private property dream, which has a few asterisks about nuclear war and power politics, we're not going to defend ourselves.
But could you not make the same argument that this is what Russia was doing with the belief that Ukraine is joining NATO?
But Ukraine didn't even want, well, now Ukraine really wants into NATO. If you looked at before Russia invaded, the opinion in Ukraine was not to join NATO, the public opinion. And indeed, they weren't even on the map. The map is the Membership Action Plan. There is, of course, Bush wanted to help the Georgians and the Ukrainians that helped Bush fight his war. Again, I have no problem blaming Bush in some of these things. And that's why they made this statement, which the Germans and the French, in the 2008 summit of NATO, they said, well, you know, Ukraine and Georgia should have the right to join NATO in the future. But it was not a membership action plan. There was nothing. There was no map. They call it a map. There was no map. There was no processes, procedures. Ukraine had nothing. There was nothing. Russia's just doing what Russia does, and that is be belligerent to smaller nations in a sort of imperial way that Western Europe, for sure, thought they were beyond. We're seeing now, you know, you just mentioned earlier, the great moderation, the 80s and 90s, people sort of live well, taxes aren't too high, salaries are okay, we're in a relative time of peace. Of course, there were wars always. You had Russia invading Afghanistan at the time in the 80s. A death toll, by the way, that they surpassed in a couple weeks in Ukraine. It was unbelievable. A casualty toll, at least. They have now under 900,000 casualties as tracked by the Ukrainians. 100,000 verified deaths. That means independent journalists have verified the deaths of 100,000 Russians that have invaded Ukraine. There are more. The Ministry of Defense says 900,000 casualties. That means POW, wounded or dead or missing. The casualties are enormous. And they are not a democratic country. They have no rule of law. They are invading a sovereign European nation. And the hard thing for us in Eastern Europe, you will find the best friends of America, of Britain, in the Baltics, in Poland, in Finland. These are countries, these are border countries with the old Soviet Union. Some of us suffered inside of it. Some of us suffered outside of it. It's a very difficult time, and the threat is real. And I don't see anybody standing up the way that, I mean, I shouldn't say I don't see anybody. By the way, another thing you should say about this whole thing with Biden and Obama, the policy was very much not aggressive toward Russia. It was appeasement of Russia. So there's this old Russian saying that if you strike with your bayonet into the belly and it's soft, go further. If you strike and you feel something hard, remove and reassess. It's an old, Russian saying. And this is precisely how they act. Because in 2014, when Obama was president, had no idea about anything foreign policy. He was trying to just reset the Bush madness. To his credit, he was trying to reset the very poorly thought out Bush wars. But he was just, I don't know how to say this politely, he was turning the other cheek again and again and getting slapped by Putin from the beginning, from 2008. He was very much appeasing Putin and all of his demands. Putin goes ahead and invades Crimea after the Maidan Revolution in 2014. This should have been
the accusation that that's a CIA coup?
How many can you show me the receipts that this is a CIA coup?
No, look, my understand. I'm just saying, this is what comes from your conservative opinion places in America. My understanding is that what was the name of the Russian-friendly president they had at the time?
Yanukovych.
Right. Reneged on a EU deal.
Right, and Yanukovych ran on European Union integration in Ukraine. He ran on getting Ukraine closer to Europe, and he reneged on that. And that was the protests in Ukraine started in December of 2013, precisely because he reneged on that deal. And then the protesters came out, his thugs, who, by the way, there was a branch of the administration called Berkut. It's a very thuggish, sort of old Soviet-style branch that's now extinct in Ukraine, and it's revitalized in Russia. It just goes to show you how they appreciate their sort of ideas. So this Berkut is now part of the Russia, military apparatus. It's not part of Ukraine anymore. But these Berkut thugs, they started to just beat the protesters, and that's how you got 1 million people coming out for Maidan. This is not a CIA coup. A CIA coup is Russian propaganda. This is Russia telling you, the West, if you'll listen, that you can't be free, you can't have self-determination, you can't have the ability to chart your own path. No, we need this old power politics. And by the way, that runs deep. What's the network that over the last 15 years has basically platformed more foaming at the mouth libertarians than any others? Need you guess?
Russia
Today, RT. Mm-hmm. I mean, you would have everybody from Ron Paul, the great Ron Paul, who I respect a lot, to, the whole gamut, the Lou Rockwells, a lot of pundits that,
you paused on
I could say.
I know who you paused on, that's fine.
Yeah. So the point is, no, look, this ran deep. Max Kaiser, he was on RT. One simply needs to ask the question. You can either be naive and talk about sort of the utopian, anarcho-capitalist, libertarian world, which is sort of maybe the old world that your old show was dabbling in more, or we can look at what is actually happening, who is actually funding these groups. And coincidentally, it's Russia, the Tenet media scandal.
Yeah. They got Tim Pool.
It is endless. They got Tim Pool. They got Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson.
Lawrence, what's her name?
Lawrence Southern.
Yeah, Lawrence Southern.
Is that right? Yeah. I don't mind these people much attention in reality, because and the funny thing is, if you say Russian propaganda now, even that term is becoming like, oh, you're just so, it's like the boy who cried wolf. You're overreacting. You don't understand. We're just speaking our truth. We're speaking our principles. It is a war out there every day, and it's not just a hot war. It's a hybrid war, and they have been going at America hard. This is the old this old KGB agent. I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden. Yuri Bezmov, I think. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that, but anyway, I can find you the link. We can put it in the show notes. He went by a couple different names. He was an old KGB agent. He retired in Canada. He talked about this all the time, the useful idiot. He was one of the people this is someone who was doing videos in the 80s and the 90s. This was maybe even the 70s. He was a defector, lived in Canada, had a lot of guns, was very scared for his life, but he wanted to get the truth out, that the idea of the useful idiot is gospel in the way that Russia does business.
Tucker?
Need we say more? That is so obvious.
But we found out that in Russia they have shopping trolleys.
Yeah, you found
where you can.
A French restaurant, by the way. A French grocer. That's a French grocer. That was Auchan. Russia imports everything. In the old days, they would say if it was imported or not. It was better that it was imported to Russia. Forget if it's something like made locally. You needed to have an import. There's very much good to say about the way that the Russian economy works. It literally is, as plenty of U.S. Senators and congressmen have said, it is a gas station, masquerading as a state. That offends people somehow. That's just how it is. There's these old political
gas station masquerading as a state.
No, there's these old political. There's these old political cartoons with the French and the German politician looking into the gas pipe and they're saying, I don't really see what's wrong. They're looking into a gas pipe in the cartoon, and then you zoom out and the gas pipe is actually going into a Russian tank. It's not actually that complicated, but people they want to be contrarians. They want to be reactionaries. They don't want to champion the values that, we all have. And by the way, as far as foreigners or foreign governments getting involved to help Ukraine, I say this all the time. This is my number one point. There's nothing more American than having the French help you win your war of independence. When we broke away from you guys, the French helped us for like 5 years, a couple years covertly, maybe 3 years publicly.
Yeah, bastards.
We had debt from the French, the Dutch, the Spanish. At Yorktown, the final battle, the main battle where we defeated Cornwallis, there were more French ships, artillery, soldiers, casualties than American.
Our neighbors worked against us.
More French. So the idea, I think a lot of people, certainly Americans, they have this sort of idealized, it's some corn-fed patriots that are sort of sitting there planning out their war of independence and their Declaration of Independence, which, by the way, there are, geniuses. Jefferson, Adams, Madison, all geniuses. Washington, a legendary figure. But there was so much help from Europeans. There's a Polish general, Pulaski. He was the father of American cavalry, and he was a Polish general. It all comes back to the freedom in Poland and Ukraine. So Russia, just very quickly on this, Russia, the Germans, the Austrians, they wiped Poland, Lithuania off the map by 1800. People always talk about World War I, Versailles, it messed up all the maps of Europe. You got to go back 100 years. There was this polity, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where I live right now. It was like 1 million, I think it was 1 million square miles, or I think it was 1 million square kilometers. You're like multiple Texases or multiple Californias, a huge part of Europe. Okay, this is, by the way, it's all of modern day Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania. The Baltics were in there a little bit, parts of Germany. It was a nobility. It was an elected monarchy, a little bit different than the Western monarchies, the old monarchies. But they had a commonwealth. They would have the thing called the Sejm. They would all come in. Very interesting. Flags from all around the polity. They had some of these the same as the parliament. They would have 60,000 people come and vote. And one of the things that actually brought it down, it's kind of like the European Union today. They had something called the liberum veto. And if you wanted to veto a new change, some change in the tax law, some change in the policies, basically just one group, one nobility needed to veto, and the whole thing would be canceled. And so you could have like decades of people trying to preserve their liberty, but also you could have outside forces. It was typically Russia that was influencing this. Catherine the Great said Poland should never return to the map when it was a German queen, by the way, one of the first main Russian Tsarina, Catherine the Great, German, of course. So a lot of twisted history there. But anyway, the point is, at the same time that all this craziness is happening in Europe, you have Poland basically collapsing, Lithuania collapsing. These are 500-year-old polities that are relatively peaceful. You have the French Revolution is happening a little bit after the American, but these Poles, French, they were going to America to fight for this ideal. It was not just corn-fed Americans in the 13 colonies. Pulaski was a Pole, a Polish war hero that was training the American cavalry. He said it was just a disastrous organization at the beginning when Washington brought him on. And here's another wild thing. This is something that has something to do with the old DEI policies that Trump is enacting today. Pulaski, were tracking his bones for a while. I don't remember what was the impetus that they wanted to check it, but they couldn't find his bones. Because this guy is a genuine war hero. He was the first general. He's a genuine war hero in the revolution. And they tracked his bones. They started to look at his bones, and they look like the bones of a woman. They did tests. This is real. This is your ChatGPT this if you want. The Smithsonian did tests. They verified the DNA with one of his descendants. it's possible he was either genetically a woman or an intersex person. So talk about DEI. This is the first American, the father of American cavalry was, he was said, I don't know, like didn't like the accompaniment of women or something, but it's just absurd, in my opinion, that we have these tropes, these narratives, these ideas. Another reason why I don't respect at all like the work of these people, like Scott Horton writes this book called Provoked. He has over 500 times uses the word Nazi in a book that's supposed to be about the freedom of Ukraine, but also how that freedom is not justified because this war is provoked. Basically, this old narrative that's just calling Ukrainians Nazis. And our friends at the Vatnik Soup. Do you know what the word Vatnik means?
Nope.
This is it means a tanky. Do you know what tanky means? Tanky?
I think so, but tell me. I don't want to define it. It'd be wrong.
Titushka? No, these are all different things. Titushka is like a provocateur, someone that goes, when there's a peaceful protest, the Titushki come in, it's a Russian term, they come in and, they rile shit up to provoke and then to ruin the sort of genuine grassroots.
We're in a morning of noise in this.
They were saying they were going to test it.
Okay. All right. Anyway.
Should we wait?
No. Or we'll just leave it in. They can see the reality of recording a podcast.
Yeah.
There's noise and shit everywhere.
Town Center, London. No, so where was I? Oh, about the provocateurs. So this is a term that now has been ascribed to many Western Russian sympathetic Russian appeasers. Vatnik, it just means it's a very it's a little bit insulting. A tanky. These are people that basically just believe in Russian propaganda. If someone like Scott Horton actually believed that Ukrainians were Nazis and this narrative that Ukraine has all these modern Nazis that somehow don't deserve independence, it's such an insulting thing for them as they fight for their freedom. But if you actually believe that, you should find this unearthed video that our friends at Vatnik Soup, it's a guy named Pekka Kaljonen, sorry if I missed this word, he's a nice Finnish guy, works very hard against Russian propaganda. He found this interview from his wife about a month after the invasion. And his wife, very eloquently, she's a Jewish Ukrainian, by the way, very eloquently talking about how, yes, there are perhaps 800 Nazis in Ukraine. She's talking about this Azov battalion, which has some Russian roots, actually. But anyway, it was taken over by the Ukrainians. And she basically spends the entire interview talking about how Ukrainians are simply trying to reclaim their identity, all of the stuff about the Ukrainian language, perhaps outshining the Russian language in the law, is about them trying to reclaim their identity. And she actually says in the interview, it hurts my soul, I'm paraphrasing, but I feel it in my soul if you would call Ukrainians Nazis. And Scott Horton has called some Ukrainians Nazis on Twitter. He did it all the way back in 2014. We can link to it in the show notes if you want. But someone like this, who is supposedly writing a scientific, fact-based book about how Russia is provoked, why would you spend 500 words out of your 700-page book? That includes, I think, footnotes, by the way, I should say that. Why would you write this when it clearly seems to be against the general view of your family? To me, it's either some sort of unhinged schizophrenia there, or what I think is most likely, it's just simply a grift. These people are grifting. It's what do the tenant media people do? You're going to get paid $100,000 an episode and not question it and say Ukraine is your enemy, like Tim Pool did. Say Ukraine is the enemy of this nation, while you're getting paid $100,000 from a Russian front company for your episode. This is insulting, deeply disgusting. And
it could just be outside of the tenant media guys. Scott Horton is a well-known anti-war person. He always says he's an anti-war person. He has an anti-war coalition or something or other.
It was antiwar.com.
Is that his website? Could it just be a case that like he's so anti-war, he's finding a reason to have this war not justified? The start, he has to find a blame for the start.
Again, where does it stop? The sort of they seem to look at it as sort of some militant, ideological yet principled stance of always being anti-war, right? So no matter what, they're anti-war. But would they have said that about the American Revolution, which had plenty of help from the French, Dutch, Spanish, Poles, who had their own state fall apart? I mean, look, war is hell. Of course, it's not. If anyone thinks that I'm getting on this show, which is going to lose you subscribers,
we'll count them. I might get some new ones.
I hope you do. Because
no, look, it's important to hear the rate.
Look, this is the free world we're talking about, and it is under attack right now more than it's ever been in the last 80 years.
And there is a train of narratives and thoughts that's easy to fall down. There is. You can pick up with it was a CIA coup. You can point to the fact that there seems to be some weird stuff going on with Hunter Biden having contracts in Ukraine, and then the incentives with that.
I can speak to that.
I'm the collection of things that you get told. You know, if you listen to a certain type of podcast or follow a certain type of people on Twitter, that there's this Azov battalion, that there's Nazis, that there was there was these actions on the Ukrainian border where there's a lot of Russians and there was a lot of abuse towards Russians. You can say Russia was provoked because Putin never said, or whatever that agreement was, that NATO would not expand. You can start to see this growing, I don't want to say pro-Russia, but like defense of Russia and anti-Ukraine, anti-Zelensky train of thought. Zelensky is corrupt. If you're susceptible to this information, there's a lot of it coming at you.
There is.
That would make, and if it's the people that you vote for or that you listen to, you follow, people tend to rationalize. I tend to find people rationalize the political or ideologies that they follow. So if you're for example, in the UK at the moment, if you're a Labour voter, some of Labour's policies seem to be very anti-working class. You may start to rationalize them because you voted for them. I think it's very hard to break free of the kind of ideological camp you're in. It takes a lot.
Yeah.
And so if you voted for Trump and you've become a fan of Elon Musk and you listen to Dave Smith's podcast, or if you're a fan of Scott Horton, and you've got this weight of information from these people you believe and trust telling you that Russia was provoked, that Zelensky is corrupt, that all this money is going into Ukraine to help defend the war and it's disappearing, you can see how a large volume of people start to believe this or think this is what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's this such different set of views of people out in America, this kind of Republican right, and the people who are living in Europe who have got completely different interpretations of Putin, Russia, and what's going on in the war. By the way, it's bleeding over here into this, because we've got this new world of conservatism, like reform conservatism, where the Conservative Party have essentially, they're collapsing here, and people don't know who to vote for, and they're moving to reform. And they are starting to share the same kind of sympathies and empathies for what's happened from the Russian side. It's confusing, and I can see how it happens.
Yeah.
So it's important someone like you comes on and says, look, by the way, I'm a Latvian American. I live over there. We see this world entirely differently from you. Here's our version of history.
Yeah. Many things to say about that. I would like to specifically address the Burisma and the supposed agreement and those things. But again, just to back up, if you want to talk about principle, if you want to talk about freedom and liberty and democracy and liberal democracy, which is not a bad word. There's a lot of people in this right, center right, alt right, hard right, who like to think that now it's liberal democracy isn't a bad thing. You have these pseudo, intellectuals, these Curtis Yarvins talking about we just need to start up. We need sort of like a new monarchy. This guy that's helping Elon Musk or Peter Thiel with their sort of intellectual worldview. Those things to me are extremely dangerous and extremely damaging to making sure that there are equal rights for all. I mean, democracy is not easy. It is hard. We are far from a global, liberal, democratic order. And I think but a couple things. First of all, for me, it comes back to the principle. If you were rightly against a nation abusing the own international law that they actually typically abided by, as far as keeping the shipping lanes open and, general international law, not just occupying countries willy-nilly, okay? Certainly fought some bad wars, Vietnam, for example, bad war. Obviously Iraq, bad war. That Iraq was just a pure invasion without any international coalition except for the Brits. Thank you. If you were against that, why would you suddenly be for Russia doing the same thing? That's where you lose me right there. Just the initial absolute not following that principle. Okay. And then the only thing that I can say, again, just in a broad stroke, broad brush manner, is you really need to have sympathy for, or I'm hoping that I can just help with a little bit of empathy for people that have lived through this and could perhaps tell you about some of it. For example, like you said, I'm in the Baltics, so Russian propaganda, these narratives, RT, these type of things that kind of just, it's like water off the duck's back. The Baltics are probably the most susceptible nations of Russian propaganda in the world. And we were in the Soviet Union. You might ask, you might want to put two and two together there. You might want to try to understand why that is. The Poles, the Finns, the Ukrainians now. I mean, these are people that should be listened to, not shunned or blitz-pieced or make peace at any cost. And again, if you think that the Ukrainians are just going to sign any dotted line based on, what's happening right now, things were a lot darker for them in the start of 2022, and they have just been heroes defending their nation. So that's one thing. Quickly, and then again, I don't know how many. We should diverse things, but we're in so many different directions now, and like I said, I got a lot of charts. I usually like to show people, facts and figures, and try to draw conclusions there.
But if part of this, I think it would be useful for some people who are down that rabbit hole of believing there was a justification for Russia to invade Ukraine, that Ukraine went through a CIA coup, that Zelensky is corrupt, that all these new narratives that exist certainly in America and are bleeding over here to parts of Western Europe. At least give them some other ideas to think about where they might be wrong, because I think we should all be challenged.
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
Again, the broad strokes about having empathy. If you were against one nation invading per international law, I would suggest being against another nation invading, and actually leaning into that, not just sort of hedging and say, oh, well, I'm against it, but they were provoked. This is just very weak. It's just very weak, and it doesn't have empathy toward the people that are fighting heroically for their freedom. Secondly, again, or thirdly, I guess I should say, is the fact that it's just a myth that Americans didn't have help from Europeans in their own fight for independence. And on it goes. But just quickly on this topic, and we can probably wrap it, but the idea, the Burisma thing, again, that was a Yanukovych friendly, Russian friendly entity. Terrible. I think absolutely terrible that Biden's son is on the board there. When the full-scale invasion started, and maybe not before, the people from that company ended up all in Russia. It's absurd that Biden had his son on there. And certainly, why would I defend that? I think it goes back to what I was saying before. Obama, the first invasion, Obama did nothing, showed no backbone, no strength, just let Russia take it. That's pretty bad leadership. All right, that's no defense of international law, no defense of borders. It's not like what Bush Sr. did with Kuwait at all. Just let Russia take it. And then in 2022, Biden has done everything to let Ukraine survive, but not enough to let them win. No one wants to just say Ukraine should win. What's the problem with saying we need to kick the invader out of the territory that they illegally occupied versus saying, you know what, let's just appeasement, let's go, you can have more. Like I go back to the bayonet example. Every step of the way that Putin has taken some more, it's basically gotten very minimal pushback from the West. I think he was surprised with the pushback that finally happened in 2022 during the full scale. And all I can say is thank God that they really have been that incompetent of a military. You know, this was supposedly the second greatest military in the world. I have some great screenshot tweets of people that predicted a Sputnik moment, and people thought that this was going to be...
Take Kiev in 3 days.
Right, take Kiev in 3 days. There were generals coming in with their parade regalia, all of these things, and none of that happened. So all of those things I would agree with. Is bad policy, is weak policy. It's not showing American strength or world liberal democratic strength. And the Ukrainians are the ones that are paying the price. Now, with what's happening with Trump, we're on a completely different path. I think no one can ignore that, or you'd be a fool not to admit that. And I don't think that Trump has the full understanding of how much Ukrainians are willing to fight against the rapes, the tortures, the deportations. It seems like the only thing that's catching some heartstrings in the West now is talking about this 20,000 children that have been deported.
Yeah, kids.
This is not a new number, Peter. It's been 20,000 for at least a year. This is from the early days when they occupied. Of course, there are 1.3 million or so children in the occupied territories of Ukraine. And there are some just terrible screenshots of the indoctrinations. I have some as well if you want to look at them. But
I've seen them.
Yeah, I mean, you got people in balaclavas. Like, why would you need to hide your face if you're teaching some great Russian values? Is this? It seems very strange. Just absolutely gut wrenching. And they're deporting orphans brazenly on camera, deporting them to Russia, taking them away from their country, and it's.
So across the kind of Baltic states where you are, your friends, the people you talk to, what is a realistic resolution to this that people want? Because it doesn't feel like there's a scenario where Putin just pulls out and says, "You were right." So what is a realistic and acceptable solution? Because I think everybody, yourself included, wants an end to this.
Right. And Ukrainians included as well. No one wants peace more than the Ukrainians.
And by the way, one side of this, we went out for a drink the other night. We discussed Daryl Cooper, and we could have a long conversation about that. But one thing he did make me think about, despite the fact that I disagree with him, despite the fact I think he's historically incorrect about some of World War II, he did this thing where he did make me think of the two sides of war. And there are Russians who are being sent to their death. There are Russian people on the side of this who don't want to be part of this as well.
Yep.
And I have an empathy there. When an end to the war isn't just about Ukrainian people, there's also about Russians who are being sent to war.
Okay. The best thing that the Western world could and should have done was support Ukraine from the beginning, from 2014. Okay, we were saying it in the Baltics. We knew that the threat was real. The threat continued to grow. Putin didn't experience resistance. He kept going. Okay, that was the biggest problem. It's continued all the way on to this day. I just want to remind people, every time that some Western resolve shows themselves, also led by the U.S., which seems like it's changing. Now it's going to have to be the European Union or Europe or Coalition of the Willing, it seems, not led by America, and this is changing. But every time that resolve was showing some signs of strength in the last 3 years, it was either A, the nuclear threat is real, it's going to be World War III, we need to stop, back down to Putin, or simply that how can you, just the idea that how can Ukraine keep fighting? It's all, they're just going to lose their whole territory. I remind you, they've been fighting for 3 years on the full scale, and they've lost about the same amount of territory that they had lost at the beginning, a little bit more. It was, from the 2014 days, it was maybe 12, 14% of the territory. Now it's 20%. Okay, it's more, certainly more, I should say. But it's not that, actually no, 8% at the very beginning, and now it's like 20%. But they got up close to 30% when they started attacking Kyiv and all this stuff in 2022. Russia has lost territory on net from those early days of the war. They've lost territory. So the point is, max resolve, max support for liberal democracies and sovereignty. This is all that Ukrainians are asking for. They're not even asking for troops. Unlike the American Revolution, they're not even asking for ships and that. They're asking for weapons and they're asking for support. So my immediate response is always that the only way to make this bully back down is you have to bloody their nose. You have to. And Ukraine has been successful in doing that. The Biden administration was way too slow, way too long, way too late. Obama administration as well. So I would fully agree with anybody. And I would say a normal opposition, clear-eyed, liberty-minded Republican opposition in the United States, for example, should take advantage of that fact. That would be the John McCain way of doing things. But we're not there. So my recommendation, which is what everybody in Eastern Europe is pushing for, and you see more and more, as much as we can, Eastern Europe is trying to deliver as many weapons as they can without the United States, as much support as they can without the United States. You just have to keep on pushing for that until you can get the Russians to back down there. And then, yeah, it's going to be a ceasefire. It's going to be, this demarcation line, and Ukrainians are never going to acknowledge the territory that has been taken. Hopefully later, in some sort of a South Korean situation, they could eventually get it back. Obviously, South Korea is a bad example because it's 70 years now that situation has not been resolved. Ukrainians don't want it to be something like that. But this is an imperial, megalomaniacal war that's going on, and they certainly want peace and a just and lasting peace. So that's going to happen. But as far as I know, whatever Trump says, and again, there are a lot of Russian talking points that are getting into his speech. When Trump last month was calling Zelensky a dictator, or saying that Zelensky shouldn't have started the war, or Zelensky has 4% approval rating, those things could have only come from Putin himself. No, they actually came from Putin himself. The 4% approval rating, I am 100% certain, came from Putin himself in his phone call. That came from nowhere else in the world. Zelensky's approval ratings have increased since then from the 50%-ish numbers to 70%-ish now.
Is this why Putin, one of his conditions is he wants Zelensky to step down because he had such?
That's a Putin position as well, and Trump has been echoing that. They've been talking to the opposition, and even the Ukrainian opposition has been saying we can't hold an election right now and doing this. And there's so much to talk about.
We could go for
I'm
hours.
sorry if honestly, I do apologize. I feel like that if in the world of Bitcoin, monetary policy in Eastern Europe, you're talking to perhaps the what's the reality? The strongest opinions there, but
again,
there's so much to talk about.
You're a Latvian American. You're a citizen. You're from the Baltics. You're living in a region whereby you're under the threat of war expanding to where you live, which would affect you and your family.
It's going to be an immediate threat after this ceasefire starts, because Russia's going to start rearming.
Yes.
And the threat is going to become more immediate. The Estonian Ministry of Defense, as I just mentioned, has said something to that effect recently as well. It's obvious.
And I assume in the region, unilaterally, everyone is fearing this. And that's not a fear that the opinion leaders, makers, creators in parts of America are living with. They don't understand that across these Baltic states, everybody is fearing this. And so I think if you come here to make a show with me and we're going to talk about Bitcoin and then we end up talking about this, that's absolutely fine. People need to hear this because they're not hearing this. They're not hearing this.
Yeah.
And so I'm okay doing this. But shall we talk about money as well? I mean, look, is there anything more? If you want to talk about more things, I'm okay with it.
I apologize for the subscriber loss in advance.
Yeah, like I say, we might acquire a few.
I hope you do.
Please don't go read the comments.
I I have a YouTube channel as well, and it's,
you know what it's like. Faraz, who came on here again, I like Faraz. I think it would be really interesting. I think Kurt would agree with this. If you and Faraz here were talking about it one day, I think the two of you have an interesting conversation.
Yeah,
he's not pro Putin. The way he talked about it with me is just we have a new world order, and we have essentially three very powerful people in Putin, Xi, and Trump, who all approach things differently. And his view is that I'm trying to remember. I'd have to go back and listen, but he talked about Putin has probably the largest. Is it the largest border in the world to defend his Russian border? I think it is. Yeah.
It's the largest
it's a
country
very
in the world,
largest country, large border to defend. He doesn't want an infection of Western liberal ideas because that would make defending that border and his authoritarian government harder to defend. And so that's kind of one of the way he acts. But he said we're in this new world, and his view is that with Trump, what we have is somebody who is trying to show that America is strengthened in a different way, that, we can go and take countries. We can take Canada and we can take Greenland, and and essentially we just have this new world order where we have three significant global leaders who maybe appease each other for the sake of some form of weird new world order and peace. That was kind of his view. Now, if he was here, he'd articulate it a lot more intelligently.
No, I mean, it certainly looks like that at the moment. I mean, when I was listening to a lot of the hardcore Trump supporters, and again, I'm trying to give Trump the benefit of the doubt even to this day, even as, I wrote you when we were talking about doing the show like a month ago, I'd said there's not going to be a ceasefire by a month from now when we speak, and there hasn't been. Doesn't mean there won't be, because Putin has his May 9th Victory Day. This is the old World War II celebration, where it's the Russian Victory Day of World War II.
Big speech.
Again, and they used to do these big military parades. Now all the kit is in Ukraine, so they can't have the kit. So it's just like, some soldiers and speeches. There's some speculation that even Trump would come to that if they have the ceasefire. I don't see that necessarily now. Maybe.
That would be fucking wild.
It would be wild. But what did I want to say with that point? Well, the idea that this sort of multipolar world is coming to the forefront, I think, is very appealing to Trump. I would like to still give Trump, though, the benefit of the doubt. But every day that passes, it's not what was told to me by the true believers and the people that would think that he would help Ukraine. For example, in the fall, people were saying, well, Trump's going to either take one of two tacks. He can't do both simultaneously, but he's either going to go to the Ukrainians, he's going to strong arm them, say we're going to give up aid for peace. So you just better make peace and see what we have. Or he's going to go to the Russians and say, if you don't make peace and stop this war, I'm going to give Ukraine max weapons.
He did stand up. He did stand up this week to Putin, didn't he?
He said he's angry.
Yeah.
But then he threatened oil sanctions. He threatened oil tariffs, as Trump calls it. He makes up these words, as we know. Secondary tariffs on oil from Russia. The United States doesn't import any oil from Russia. So
no, but it's countries who buy there.
There's a word for that, Peter. It's not tariffs, it's sanctions.
Yes.
Trump is afraid to say that word because he's doing everything possible to appease Putin. So he's doing everything possible to appease Putin while not doing it in the old way, which was the Biden way. And again, I'm not saying the Biden way was perfect at all. I am not. I think the door is wide open for Republicans to do a new international foreign policy posture to the world that's strong. The United States still is the strongest power in the world. You can project power, you can project peace well better than the Biden or Obama administration did. I fully concede that. Point is, from everything that I was told about how it was either one of the two, right? He'd either strong arm the Ukrainians or strong arm the Russians. Say, look, if you don't agree to this, it's going to be max pain for you. I've seen none of the latter, all of the former, and more, to the point where it's really not even peace at any cost. It's surrender. He wants surrender from the Ukrainians. I mean, from the beginning, saying that they're unlikely to have their territory back. They're unlikely for this, that, no NATO. Even just giving all those points away. If Trump is supposedly the expert negotiator that he is, you would think he would have held back for more negotiation. All the things, the UN vote, which, again, these UN resolutions are meaningless, as we know, with the Iraq War. But the fact that the United States has been voting with Russia, and he's got his envoy now, Witkoff, who was his Middle East envoy, who now apparently is his Russia envoy. It's very interesting. This gentleman, Zelensky, said he might be good at real estate, but it doesn't seem like he understands the situation. He went on Tucker. He said, those 4 regions that are in dispute, Crimea, the Donbass. This is how he started. There's 4 regions, Crimea, the Donbass. First of all, if he's talking about the 4 regions that are not Crimea, Crimea is also a region. There's 5 administrative, these oblasts are like these provinces. Okay, there's Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Those are the 4 regions. He didn't get one right. He said Donbass is just the general area. So if he says those 4 regions, Crimea, Donbass, it shows you even off the top of his head, he has no experience in this theater. He's not doing it all. He's just Trump's real estate guy trying to make a deal. So it's very clear to me that this is a peace at any cost, surrender at any cost operation, not listening to the needs of Ukrainians, the needs of Europeans. Trump just wants to make a deal. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Obama got it. And Trump is, I think, rightly upset about that because Obama got it 2 months into office or 2 weeks into office, which was absurd. He didn't do anything, and they gave it to him. So Trump is always angry at Obama. So he wants that.
Well, he embarrassed him, didn't he?
Yeah, he embarrassed him about the birther thing. And, Trump wants that Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to one-up Obama. But there is very much a peace at any cost environment going on right now. And I can just tell you that is not good for Ukraine. It's not good for Eastern Europe. And it's almost, how do I say, so strong on this. It's very much probabilistic in my view, very probable that war would continue. If you do a 30-day ceasefire just to get through the May 9th parade, or Trump can get even some net recognition. I don't know if the Nobel Committee would give him a peace prize for only 30 days, but they're so far apart in all these other things, as I've just mentioned with some of these things. I mean, Russia is saying that Ukraine can't be foreign backed. This is Russia with Chinese kit, North Korean troops, and Iranian drones. So the situation is far from over. I think it's very dangerous, and that's my piece there. And I probably, again, I apologize for
Don't apologize. Like I say, you're living on the edge of war. I think it's fair that you come say your piece, and if that's the thing you want to talk about, and it allows these listeners to hear an opposing voice, and a few people take a step back and question maybe where they're getting their opinions from, or maybe they could be wrong. And I think it's a good thing. You're my friend. I want you to have that moment. Every time we try and talk about economics, we talk about war, and it's fine.
We do, yeah. Well,
because we're in a war.
We get on different tangents, and I am fully responsible for that. I know, but no. I mean, look, I got a lot of macro stuff I can show you.
Yeah, let's show us. Where should we go?
So we have this. Let's look at E2, because that is GDP per capita, and I think this one will show you the state. This one's going to show you the state of.
See, GDP per capita I always think is something I want to direct people to, because when they start talking about GDP, it's always like, no, GDP per capita is the number you really want to focus on.
And it's also better, in my opinion, than this purchasing power parity. Russia likes to do this purchasing power parity, but even there, they're doing this conversion factor where, okay, you can apparently buy more things for less money in Russia, but still, GDP, it's not a perfect metric by any stretch of the imagination, but if you want to rank things, you want to see where people are, the actual economic power is just new goods and services that are sold each year. GDP, you put it per capita, you see the United States, far and away the lead, $90,000. So this is NATO non-US, so this is all the basically Western European nations pre-1999. Look at that, half of the US. And then you have us, $30,000. So we are NATO post-1999 members. And then Russia and China are half of us. So this is important, I think, just to show you, first of all, again, the general power of these countries, why we should be standing up to countries like Russia and China. Although there are many things to say about this. We can look at military spend. It's going to be a different picture. And then look at Ukraine. This is the amazing thing about, for all the appeasers, for all the people that want to give up on on Ukraine, they are 1/3 of Russia.
But up until about 2008, they were getting above. No, that's China.
Yeah, China.
But
China.
in the 2000s, they were similar to Russia, early 2000s.
Yeah. So, look, I mean, Russia, and a huge portion of that, you're getting, it depends on how you measure it. Certainly over a quarter of Russia's GDP is that gas station GDP. It's oil and gas. It's very low. It's high skilled, high tech, but low. It's a very low general proportion of the population is experiencing a lot of that GDP with Russia. The Gini coefficients are crazy for Russia.
But if you compare the growth of the US and Western kind of European countries from kind of 1990 to the global financial crisis, we've kind of kept at a similar rate-ish. And since the 2008 financial crisis, we've been pretty flat for a decade.
Yes,
with
indeed.
A little bit of recent growth, whereas the US is just massive growth.
And of course, there's a currency factor there, right? The world's reserve currency.
Yeah, but
People still use the dollar, and that's a factor.
But is their growth coming at the expense of the rest of us?
I would say that's a safe yes.
And
I would say that that's a risk for America if we are going to do this multipolar world. And again, it's too early to tell. I want to be clear. I'm not writing Trump off in the grand scheme. Maybe he's going to come through on some of this stuff, but the dollar's down. And since he's been in office, the stock market's way down. Defense stocks, like I said, down. This is all early stuff. I'm more of a macro, big picture trends. But anyway, so that's GDP per capita. And then if we look at, let's look at Gov Spend E3. It's the next one, actually. Okay, so here's...
Wow.
Yeah. Now look at this. China's obviously rising fast in the 2000s. They got $6 trillion a year they spend, 6.7, nice number, 6.666 actually, for China. But look at Western Europe and the U.S.
Parity.
Parity.
So is this why this is how our middle class are getting eroded?
There's your social welfare right there.
And so because we haven't had the GDP per capita growth to support that.
Right. And it's massive.
Yeah.
It's massive. Well in excess. You can look in there in the 2000s and in the 90s, well in excess of the United States. Maybe not quite double, but for example, mid 90s, you're over 4 trillion in, Western Europe, let's say, and the US is down to like 2.5 or something, 3 trillion, something like that. And so this is why I think you do see this populist backlash in the United States. Say, look, Europe is free riding. We've been paying for your defense. We've been paying for your security. It's time to, get serious about these things. And these are all things I support, by the way. I absolutely support Europe getting stronger. But the problem is
can't afford it.
It's a weak time. It's a very bad time. And China's on the rise. But look at that. And this is where, again, we can see how weak we are. Even though we have strong GDP growth, we don't spend a lot. Look at that Eastern, that's basically Eastern Europe, that red line, NATO non-US post-1999 members. We spend 1.6 trillion, Russia 800 billion. So it's double Russia and more, but well behind China, well behind the US. This is why we need the West still.
But I want to see that as a percent of GDP.
I got it. Next slide.
Cool.
Next slide. Okay. So it's a little bit more noisy. It's hard to get through the decades here. But the narrative basically is China has plenty of room to grow here.
Yeah.
NATO, non-US and NATO, both pre-1990 and post-1999 are high. And the United States is actually not as high as you would think. So again, this goes back to the strength of the United States, the purchasing power of the dollar, But
this is to me why Europe's so fucked at the moment, because
it's not looking good for
47%, and the trajectory. It's been pretty flat, really, but it's eating away constantly. The wealth of nation.
I think France got something like 60% of their economy was government spend during COVID. You see that spike during COVID.
Yeah.
France itself was just, it's unbelievable. So, yeah. And these are just massive trends. Here's another thing just to keep in mind. Like, these are aircraft carrier type movements. Yes, you can have some big changes when you have a crisis or the need to spend. But, this is why we do have usually the fallback is the Bitcoin backstop, because you have an escape hatch from this type of a system. But at the same time, we have real world problems like we just discussed. For Ukraine, you're going to have actors that want more spending on defense. And I think that that's going to be delivered. I mean, Ukraine, it's just incredible how much that government spend, of course, is nearly all military.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it's unbelievable how much they've had to take on. But they are the one comforting thing, at least, is that we're seeing how unorganized and how terrible a mafia kleptocratic economy such as Russia can take on the West. Although they are learning and they will continue to learn, so that's something to worry about. We can go to E6. All right, so this is military spend. SIPRI is the preeminent guys for this, the Stockholm Institute for Peace. They should be coming out right about now for their 2024 figures, but they drill down a little bit more into the differences. But here you see, obviously, United States, there's $1 trillion per year. Just look how much farther down NATO is.
Yeah.
And then us. We have $75 billion in raw number military spend. $75 billion, below Russia, below China. I mean, these things they're not going to go away. If you power politics, there's going to be a vacuum. If the United States decides to void that vacuum, decides to back up, then you're absolutely going to see China, you're going to see Russia try to fill it. Thankfully, Russia's weak, but they have a lot. And here's another thing to say about that, because there are so many. Just still a little bit on the the idea of I guess we're making this a defense show.
Yeah,
a defense and macro. If you go to U10, so it's way down there. Yep. So this one came out in Bloomberg. It's not from Bloomberg yet. International Institute for Strategic Studies. This is where, and a lot of people say, okay, I think I've heard Dave Smith say this. So you say that Russia is such a threat, but Russia can't take Ukraine in 3 years.
Well, its military isn't that much bigger.
Both true statements, but they are learning. They are, there's 150,000 troops in Belarus right now, apparently going to do some military exercises this summer. They do have the second largest army in the world. It's a very poor, it's a disastrously poorly trained army. A lot of them have been taken out in the 3 years in Ukraine. But if you have Russia, the second largest army, envelop Ukraine, the sixth largest army, and then that takes on Europe, Ukrainians are already demoralized and angry that the West, let's say they certainly want to be part of the West. They want the West to help them stand up, but you do not want Russia to take over Ukraine and then to move in. The Baltics, obviously, we're incredibly small, need help. Poland's trying to increase their army more, but, it's fragmented. This is the thing with Europe. It's a fragmented economy. There's not a single chain of command. This has always been the problem with Europe. And I think that this is the real threat that's going to be here for the next 5-10 years, unless Europe can really sort it out. But I do see the United States continuing to step back, because that's what Trump is saying. So if he's going to step back, then Europe has to somehow get stronger. But that's my answer to basically, you say Russia is weak and poor and bad, but obviously they have a huge economy. Where should we go here? Let's look at U6. This is an interesting one. This is World War I, World War II, debt, lend-lease, reparations. Everything that's negative is basically things that nations have drawn down on to fight wars, and the positive is what they've repaid.
Didn't repay much.
Look at the UK. 4.6 billion World War I. They repaid a little bit token, but I'm just basically putting it at zero because they defaulted. It was rewritten again in World War II. Look at that, 30 billion in World War II for the UK. That was written down to 3.75, which they only paid back in like 2006 or something.
Yeah.
And then the Marshall Plan, they took another 3 billion. That's aid. This, I think, really shows what the U.S. has done, because most of this is the U.S., by the way. Not all, but most of it is. So it shows what the U.S. has done and how the U.S. has shaped the world order, and actually really not asked for much in return. Of course, they've gotten a lot in return. You know, Europe's the biggest trading bloc. There are plenty of American companies in Europe, all the rest.
Global reserve currency.
Yeah, and you also see, look at that. You can see how that disproportionate, look at Germany in World War I. There's that Versailles terrible reparations that they put 30 billion basically on Germany. And this is what people were saying about the Trump plan, because this mineral deal, they wanted, Trump basically wanted to tie Ukraine's hands for this 500 billion estimated and take all of the profits all the time in this Ukrainian deal until they were paid back. So people were saying it's even worse than the Versailles for the Germans in World War I, because 30 billion inflation adjusted is at least 500 billion. It's probably 600, 700 billion. If you did it in gold, it's like a couple trillion. So this shows you, but here's another thing. People like to say that the Versailles Treaty sort of made the Nazis, right? Germany was just so angry. That's why they made them hysterical. There was an angry economy. They had to pay all this back to the Brits and the French and the Americans, and they were very angry. The problem with that argument is, first of all, no one paid back their debt. Not the Brits, not the French, not the Italians. Second problem is, the Italians were the ones that invented fascism. Mussolini, Il Duce was the one that started it first. Hitler took the example. And all of this is just to say, it is sensitive. Like, we are in a very sensitive point, because we're now at a place where you have a nation that's young. Yes, they were part of that Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that we talked about, and they had a seat at the table. They were part of the Sejm and the parliament, and they would come in and vote just like the Poles and the Lithuanians. The Ukrainians would do that. But it wasn't, in name, and this is where Putin's trying to say this is a made-up country, all the rest, and we have, unfortunately, right-wing media agreeing with this. We do not want to put Ukraine through the same situation that we put Germany through. I'm not saying that it caused it, but why would we want to saddle them with the same debt that we did for the Germans? And, there's just little lessons here and there. I do think that everybody's at risk here. Like I said, 50% of the European governments were authoritarian in the 30s. We've got to be worried about that right now. And, I don't necessarily have a solution to that, but I think that we are unfortunately moving there. If you go to the next one, U7, this is a good survey that the FT put out. The US right, Turkey, China, Russia, these are all in the sort of more right, leadership right, center right, and more authoritarian, less cooperating quadrant. And this is according to, there's world values surveys. It's some huge survey. So FT did all this quadrant, but we're nowhere near the rest of the world right now as far as aligning ourselves with values. And we're seeing that, and when I say we, I mean the American right. You have Turkey right now, millions in the streets in Turkey. Georgia's on 3 months of protests. Ukraine, obviously. Serbia, for different reasons. Serbia is kind of always out of the European loop and more closer to Russia, but they're tired of the authoritarianism. And Moldova is at risk. They're not there, but they're sort of at risk. They are pro-European at the moment. All of these countries are just on the brink, and to me, it's very reminiscent of World War or pre-World War II, authoritarian figures rising, and everybody's telling us that they don't want that. And so if you're going to just go back to the CIA conspiracy theory, the CIA caused all these coups. Well, as far as I know, you now have this alt-right, hard-right U.S. government. And are you still telling me that the CIA is causing the revolts in Turkey, in Georgia? Georgia's been going on for 3 months. Are you going to call Georgians commies, dirty communists, because Stalin was a Georgian. I'm trying to reiterate these arguments. We say that Ukrainians are Nazis, but, Stalin was Georgian. So clearly the Georgians don't have a right to their self-determination. It's very much is on fire, a lot of these things. And I would have to say that the liberal democracies in Europe, they are too comfortable. They need to spend more, but we need to look at where they are to the rest of the outliers and see what types of governments the outliers are, which, it doesn't look like something to follow to me.
Why have you got a king there?
Yeah, put that one on. That's the next one. You wait. You want to read it?
When an American government official tells you in English that if some areas in Ukraine speak Russian, they should be part of Russia.
I mean, this one is the most insulting to Ukrainians.
Yeah.
You have Kharkiv, which is a city right on the border of Russia. It's one oblast over. So you have this Luhansk region, then you have Kharkiv, I think on the map, right next to it, right on the border with Russia. They have stood strong for 3 years. They've stood strong since 2014. Russia's tried to take it again and again and again. It's a Russian-speaking town. It's a Russian-speaking town. They want to be part of Ukraine. It's another thing that Witkoff is saying. It's the Trump administration is just droning on about this Russian propaganda that somehow if you speak Russian, you must want to be part of Russia. It's just, tell that to the Irish about, speaking English. Tell that to the Scots. Tell that to the Americans.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. I think what you're trying to make people be aware of is that we're in a far more dangerous situation than we believe we are.
That was one of the goals, yes. In particular, Eastern Europe. I'm just trying to have the listener, the viewer, get just a little bit more empathy to where we are and the situation that we're in and the environment that we're in, the reality that we're in. And we're very much pro-democracy. Democracy is not a bad word. Liberal democracy is not a bad word. In the old show, right, I know you've had plenty of people just go on again and again and again, and I would do it on my show as well. We would think that Bitcoin was kind of the solution to all problems. But
we discussed this on Saturday night.
Yeah, and it's not, in my opinion, a very accurate representation. First of all, how Bitcoin has grown, and just how general trends in the world work as well. So I think we should actually probably gonna have to leave for my flight soon, but we can talk about this actually because we're all we can make choices in life. Everybody can make choices, but there is a general trend, and people want to try to influence that trend as best they can. If you have a monopoly, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, you can really influence that trend. But there is an escape hatch, at least for your family and me in Eastern Europe. Like, I'm a Bitcoiner, and I use multi-sig. I say it publicly all the time. So if something happens to my family, we can just walk across the border and we don't even need our keys. That's a deep Bitcoin, topic, but it's not something that is really going to affect the world outside of our family. It's a great tool to have. It's a great thing to take advantage of. But the idea that sort of this hyper Bitcoinization, everybody's going to move on to sound sovereign money and the world's going to be free and great and we're all going to live in citadels. Obviously that to me is a very idealized world of where people want to go. But in the meantime, we have authoritarians, we have tyrants, we have people that want to tear down your democracy. And they might even come from people that you respect or like. Max Kaiser deleted 2,000 tweets in 2022 of saying that he doubted that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. He deleted something like 2,000 tweets. He was on Russia Today. Again, people like Max Kaiser in the Bitcoin world because he's, it's freedom money and he's been a strong champion of that. He also happened to get paid by the Kremlin. So it's there's cross currents everywhere. It's a real threat. I'm not sure if I'm completely landing the point that I'm trying to say, but Bitcoin is a tool that can help us. But the world is definitely going to continue to be shaped by politicians that in general are maniacal, but I think specifically in the West can be tempered and can be molded to generally the views of society. Liberal democracies is nothing we should be giving up on tomorrow at all. I mean, if you want to go live in Russia, you can go live in Russia and you can see how that is, try having your, enjoy your property rights there, enjoy your freedom of speech there, freedom of religion. Russia is one of the highest abortion rates in the world. I got a chart of that. We don't need to show too many of these charts, but again, the view is Russia is a Christian nation. There's a lot of white Christian nationalists to the sort of thing that's coming back. I love how Tucker says that the architecture in Russia is beautiful. I mean, the architecture in Russia is something from a Jason Bourne movie. So it's dark, it's gray. That's the architecture in Russia. You may have a few, things like the churches around the Kremlin and some interesting architecture there from the Tsarist times. But in general, Russia has contributed very little to the artistic, cultural side of society. And it's not something that people want in their lives. So there are serious risks. There's serious risks. We can still talk about Bitcoin a little bit if you want.
We good time.
All right.
Where are we at in the... I've been quite distant for the last 6 months. Working on this show, trying to fix my little town of Bedford.
Right.
One of the reasons I stopped making the show is I was making the same shows over and over again, the same topics.
Exactly.
You do something new.
Yep.
And from my distant appearance, my distant position right now, I don't feel too much has changed. I kind of transitioned the show at a period where Bitcoin was becoming a more credible real asset, as you said, you think it should be and will become.
Yep.
I think the ETFs helped with that, but I'm pretty distant. I haven't got a good grip of where we are right now.
Yeah. So we can go ahead and put up B2 if you can. So this is gold over the last 50 years.
Peter Schiff's happy recently.
55 years. Peter Schiff's happy. This is only as of February, so I didn't have it. It's been over $3,000 in March, first time ever. If you draw a trend line, you get that black line. The red line shows you how it can deviate from the trend. It's not a perfect trend. It's not like so perfect, but it's a 78% R squared. The reason I want to show you this is gold is obviously an asset that everybody understands. Even a child understands it has some value. It's always compared to Bitcoin. Central banks are buying gold right now with the uncertainty. Russia had some gold. They have some gold still, even though their other reserves have been rightfully seized for their criminal act. But gold is sort of the standard. And gold, like everything else, like stocks, like bonds, like money, if you put it on log scale and you run a trend line over, it's a straight line, okay? It's a straight line. It simply means it's constant growth, okay? So for gold, it's about 6% per year, 6 to 7% per year compounded. Anywhere you point, like the price itself can be way over or way under, but if you at least just pick that trend line, try to be a little bit scientific about it. Any point you pick on that line, back in 1980, back to, say you hold it till 1990, if you're on that line, you will get exactly the trend line growth. And it's constant. 6-7% per year, again.
Good place to park your money.
Yeah, that will give you the rate of growth. So Bitcoin is so incredible. And we can take it back to 1. This is the trend line of Bitcoin with a lot of different bands, and it might be a little bit too much for this chart, but anyway. So Bitcoin has started, as we know, in 2009, started to have a price mid-2010. If you run a trend line on Bitcoin on log scale, you get something that is not exponential. It's not a straight line. You get something that looks like this. So this is the other thing that I mentioned at the top of the show that I've been tracking since 2018. I wasn't the first to do it. There's this fellow Giovanni, he's Italian. He's a bit cantankerous, but he's a nice enough. I mean, he's a smart enough physicist, and he's been really promoting the power curve. But the power trend line is, in my opinion, probably the best way that we can see how Bitcoin is being adopted. And if you don't want to think about markets, you don't want to time markets, you don't want to look at trend lines like I do. If you just look at this over time, and I tell you that the relationship is a 96% R squared, it means the fit is very good. It means it's 96% better than if that line, the price, moved around the average. It's extremely solid fit. Remember that gold trend was a 78% trend. Then you should be able to just look at this asset and say, this is a decent place to park my money for my family.
What's the annual percent?
So here's the thing. Since it is a power curve, it starts out fast and then it slows down. So overall, you're over 100%. If you took like the very start of that curve tonight, you're over 100, actually like closer to 200%.
I think I'm more interested from about 2017.
Right. So it declines still. As of the compound growth in 2024 was 45%.
Yeah.
And by the end of this year, it's going to be 42%. So that shows you how it's declining. You can find this all on my website. It's all on my website.
It's not that it will decline forever. Will it find a...
No, it will.
It will.
It slowly and it goes on this very... So this is the power relationship.
What has it been over the last 8 years?
It's been coming down from basically more than 200%. 200% is the average.
Okay.
So it's been coming down from more than 200% down to, the last couple of years, you'd say roughly 100% growth. And I mean a couple, I mean like back to the 2017, 2018. This is 100% power growth.
This is the only asset that's outperforming that first chart we looked at. Like if you, wealth-wise, if you're getting destroyed because of CPI inflation.
Precisely.
Asset inflation, this is the place to park your money.
Yeah. So this is why when people say, that Bitcoin is something that, the founder wants to short or he, has all the money in his account, when we don't call it accounts, they're called addresses. This is an extremely powerful chart. And if you want to look at it from a prediction point of view, again, I have so many charts and probably not necessary on this show, but if you look at it, look at those rainbow lines from about 2016. So the rainbow lines are going to move around and they show you at the time where the power trend was. That's basically what it is. The all-time is the black line, the very smooth, nice black line. But the rainbow lines, you see how they sort of smooth out. They're pretty wild in 2010, 11, 12, 13. But from 2016, they almost look like the all-time line. You see that? What that is telling you is that the predictive power of this relationship has been intact. It's been in place since 2016. That's a long time. It's nearly 10 years. Bitcoin is a new asset. It's a new utility that's sort of being discovered around the world. And it turns out that the relationship is power. This is very unique. This is unlike gold, which I just showed you is a straight line on log scale. It is a sort of a more explosive at the beginning, then it tapers off. And that is the key to Bitcoin. That is what it is saying is it's a proportional growth. And you have to crunch the numbers to find out the rate. But Bitcoin is different than, say, stocks. Stocks, I told you, 7% lifetime, 9% if you reinvest the dividends. Bonds, 5, 6, 7%. Gold, 6, 7%. Population also grows exponentially, 2% per year, a little bit less. right now. So Bitcoin has this declining growth, and now it's 45%. But if I were to ask you then, okay, well, when would Bitcoin, per the model, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but per the model, when would Bitcoin get to 10% growth per year? When do you think? If it's 45% now, next year it's going to be 42. By the end of this year, it's going to be 42%.
42. I would still think maybe like a few decades out, 60, 70 years.
You're not bad.
Because it's the decline.
That's not bad. Yeah, the decline is much slower than you think. It's over 100 years.
That's over 100 years.
Over 100 years. Most people say like, oh, maybe, like 2 decades, something like that. But it's,
I
so
mean,
that
if
that
it was
is
115 years.
That's a brain-breaking statistic.
Well, if it was 115 years, the interesting thing with that is when the final Bitcoin will be mined.
Yeah, it is around that, in fact.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this is what I keep telling everybody. It's the only place I park my money.
Yeah.
Whether it's the business or, like, we had we had dinner with him. Yeah, Nick did his first transaction in my coffee shop for Bitcoin. We had 3 transactions that day. I was one of them. And we have it with the football club. And the great thing about that, we've got it at the bar. I never sell that Bitcoin. I just put it in a wallet and forget about it. And it becomes this kind of little base that protects my business in the future against the inflation that we've been seeing now and the future inflation coming. But that's where I park all my money. And I have done for the last 8 years. Yeah, not all of it, but the majority. And I do that. And myself, my family, and my businesses have all become stronger because of this. We have been able to outperform the growth in the money supply.
Your club, your football club. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah. And the next one is the town. I want the whole town to do it.
All you have to do is just, the old phrase, get off zero, take a little bit, all the models, no matter which model you want to look, people still call Bitcoin exponential. It's not exponential, it's power. But what it is saying is, this is a network type of growth. Okay, so a power relationship, just not to be too technical, just to say example, social networks follow this. Okay, so all the social networks, if you look at, GitHub contributions, if you look at nodes online, server client, you have a few large nodes, a few large places where people go online with many connections. Okay, so a few large with many connections, but then you have many, many smaller nodes, shops, places where people go with fewer connections. So few large with many, many small with few. That is that's a network effect type distribution. It's a power curve. And actually, if you look at it over time, it's also how things grow. And that's where this curve comes back, and it shows you, basically, you can put a number on this. You got to crunch the numbers, but the bottom line of where Bitcoin has demonstrated scientifically since 2016 is for every 12.7 increase in the life of Bitcoin. Okay, you have to think about it in days, not in terms of dates or whatever, but for every 12.7 increase, there's been like 5,800 days or so right now in the in the full Bitcoin data since January 3rd, 2009. If you add another 600 days, roughly, I'm just saying, I can't remember the exact number at the very moment, but if you add another 12.7% increase in time, the network doubles. And I say the network, when I say the network, I mean price. Price is the best proxy right now for the network. You can look at this with addresses. You can look at this with hash rate. They all follow power curves. They don't follow exponential curves. So it's very interesting in that this is sort of a live network that we haven't really seen. We've seen it with the internet. It also has some power type growth. But with Bitcoin, you actually have value that you can hold it. It's an escape hatch. You can use it. Your family can use it. Your town, your football club. And it just has to work in the background. This is where I think it overlays nicely into, your philosophy of let Bitcoin be a part of your business, let it be a part of your life, but it doesn't have to dominate it. It doesn't have to.
It will eventually, though.
It will, but this is also a thing where this kind of flies in the face of the old hyper-Bitcoinization arguments. Actually, Bitcoin's growth has been quite stable and predictable, but it's not exponential. Gold is exponential. Silver. Gold comes out of the ground at 1.7% per year compounded. Every year, 1.7% per year compounded. The price, as I told you, if you turn it into, can we go to, let's go to B7. We can close it with this one.
All right.
So this is the old numeraire. If you think about things in gold or in silver or whatever, gold, the native units is on the right. The dark green is on the left. That's in dollar terms. So natively, gold comes out of the ground 1.7 per year. That's an exponential number. It's fixed. In dollars, it's been about 7%, 6-7% per year. Okay, that's just gold. Peter Schiff is happy now because it's over 3,000, but you'd have to wait 50 years to sort of jump above the trend. The monetary base grows at 12.7% per year. So remember we talked about at the top of the show how inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. This is another piece of data that I've always been working on, the monetary base, just with the power curve stuff. It comes out of central banks at a rate of 12.7% per year blended. It's actually less in dollar terms. We don't have time to discuss the difference in the show. It's only 10.2%. So that shows basically dollar dominance. Is countries print 12.7% per year weighted average in the last 50 years. But in dollar terms, think about this of like like a chart, everything turned into dollars. It's less because they lose power, purchasing power against it. That's what I'm saying. That's what that chart is saying. So it's only actually 10.2% in dollar terms. You can have your pick, whichever one you want to benchmark against. And then here, look in the last two bars to the right. They have indeed been trying to cut the money supply in all measures, all manners, in the last 3 years and in the last year, about the same levels natively. But in dollar terms, it's been pretty significant. Lost 16.5%. I told you that 16.5% is 30 trillion 4 years ago, 25 trillion today. So point is, it's volatile, it's unpredictable. The long term has those trends, but still you never know in the next year or so how it might be. This is true with Bitcoin, as we know. We can have peaks every 4 years and crashes. But there's the numbers in Bitcoin. That 46% is basically a monthly average, so you can even get a higher number natively. But if you started with 50 Bitcoins in 2009, now we have 19.8 million Bitcoins. People should know there's going to be 21 million per the protocol. That's going to grow. It's eventually going to grow to about 10% per year. Now it's 46% per year. But in dollar terms, 200%, that's the average of that power. Go back to that power curve. Right now, in the last year, it's a declining number. It's 45% per year. Next year will be 42% per year, so on and so forth. It goes down. You can find it all on my website. The point is, it's better than any asset. It's better. It's never financial advice. I always say that on my show, never financial advice. But if you want to look at something that can help your family, and hopefully you can be in a safe part of the world and avoid war, although I would absolutely request and ask for empathy in those parts of the world where are war-torn and suffering. But if you just want to help your family, this is an asset that has scientifically outperformed any asset.
And the great thing about this as well is that, if you're thinking of property as an asset, you might be saying, well, I can't get a property. I haven't got the money to get a property. I can't get on the property ladder. No. You can open an account and buy $50 today, £50 today, and you can get on. You can get on that ladder. You can get off zero. Even with, it is I think it's a far easier concept to get your head around than buying stocks and shares, because it's like, well, if I want to get into equities, which ones do I buy? And do I buy an index track? Like it's complicated. And when should I sell? With this, you just get off zero and just keep accumulating it. I don't think I'm giving too much away when I say, within our football team, there's been across the company a couple of people who's taken a percentage of what they get paid in Bitcoin. It just ticks over. They're off zero every week, ticks over a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And I really like that. And I know what's going to happen in a couple of years. All the other players are going to be like, shit, we should have done that. And it's just get off zero. I mean, that's the message. Get off zero.
It is. And it's that is predictable. It's a different growth than all the other things. All those other things are exponential. If you put it on log scale, you see a straight line that's exponential. Bitcoin is different. It's way more powerful right now in the beginning, and it will eventually level off. But that's just how Bitcoin grows.
Get off zero. It's not financial advice. Get off zero.
Never financial advice.
Well, listen, I'm happy to talk about anything you want to talk about, and I'm always happy to see you.
We had a wandering walk this episode. We had a wandering walk.
Well, we had a good few days as well. It was good to show you the football, get you to my hometown again.
I loved it.
Good to show you the coffee shop. You had a coffee with that old lady. It's good to show you what we're trying to do in the town. My goal is to get Bedford off zero and get Bedford to as a town to benefit from this, and the people of Bedford to benefit. So I appreciate you coming in and doing this.
That's a noble goal. I'm always happy to be here, Peter, and best of luck. in the future.
Whenever you want to come over, you're welcome. Look, good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Get off
Take care.
zero. See you
Thank
soon.
you.